Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Necessful Fall Professional Development Webinar. We're very happy you could join us today. I am Lisa Harris, the President-elect of Necessful, and it's my honor and pleasure to welcome you as well as all of our presenters who will be joining us for this afternoon's broadcast. I also want to introduce Dr. Anne Marie Gunter, our immediate past president of Necessful, who will be helping out behind the scenes, handling tech questions and troubleshooting as needed. We do have a great agenda for our meeting today. After this brief welcome and overview, we will be having some annual meeting updates from our president, Ophelia Wade, and then we'll be launching right into our presentation from our wonderful guest speakers on the Seal of Biliteracy research. And we'll follow that up with some questions and wrap up. And we hope to end right on time at 3:30 today. Just a few points of order as we're getting started. Please remember that we are broadcasting across 6 different time zones today. Some people are wrapping up their day and others are just getting started. We'll be together for approximately an hour and a half, and then these materials will be available in our members only section of the website approximately 1 week from today. This event is scheduled for 2 to 3:30 p.m. in the Eastern Time Zone, 1 to 2:30 p.m. in the Central Time Zone, 12 to 1:30 p.m. Mountain, 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m. Pacific Time, 10 a.m. to 11:30 a.m. Alaska Time, and 8 a.m. to 9:30 a.m. for those lucky members who are in the Hawaii time zone. Okay. Also remember that this broadcast is being recorded, as I said, and will be posted online in approximately 1 week. That will include all of the materials, including the presentation slides that will be available in our recorded archive, and they'll be linked in the members only section of our Necessful website. Right now, everyone except the current presenter is muted to reduce background noise in the recording. So if you have any questions, please type it in the questions box, and we will monitor for questions and alert the appropriate presenter at the correct time. When you first join a GoToWebinar session, the control panel appears on the right side of your screen. It should look similar to the one on the slide, though there may be some variations in appearance depending on your browser. If the control panel has minimized, look for the Grab tab or the orange button with the white arrow and click on the button to maximize or open up your control panel when you need it. You can use the control panel or Grab tab to manage your session. From the Grab tab, you can hide the control panel, mute yourself if you've been unmuted by the organizer, view the webinar in full screen, and raise your hand electronically, which is the icon that looks like a hand. The audio pane at the top of the control panel lets you choose between computer audio and phone call to hear the broadcast. If you're having trouble with your headset, you may want to switch to phone call and then back to computer audio as a way to reset your audio. You can also unplug and replug your headset from the computer in order to reset your audio function. The question pane at the bottom of the control panel is the place for you to share questions with the presenters and or with the technology folks working behind the scenes today. We are recording today, so everyone being on mute will facilitate the recording being audible and without any distracting noise in the background. You might be surprised how sensitive our mics are. Please feel free to put your questions and comments in the questions box today. We'll be using poll questions and other activities during the broadcast today. So we're going to get started with a warm-up or practice poll question.
Hang on a second. Sorry to interrupt. We're getting some feedback that we might be having audio issues. Could we do a quick sound check and have everyone raise their electronic hands on their control panel? Okay, thank you. I think the problem has fixed itself. Sorry to interrupt.
Okay, thank you for checking with that, Anne Marie. So we are going to do our quick poll question practice. So take a look at the question you see. Why did you decide to participate in the Necessful Fall webinar today? And you can check all that apply. So to give this poll function, we are going to go ahead and launch this poll so that you can select your answer from those presented.
Please go ahead and click on the answers that apply to you about why you decided to participate in our Successful Fall webinar today. You can click on more than one answer and just click right on your screen.
And we'll take just a few more seconds to finish up your answers. We have about 75% completion right now. Okay, and if you take that final selection on there, we are going to go ahead and close the poll. And Anne-Marie, I'm going to ask you to do a quick share on the results.
Great. Well, it looks like we have a lot of the same reasons for being here today and deciding to participate. 90% of us who are on the line today said that we are all interested in the topic of the seal of biliteracy research. We all want to stay current on national information, and we always enjoy connecting with successful colleagues. In addition, about 20% said this is a good thing to do on the last Friday in September, and 10% said they have other reasons that they just put in the question box. So from our colleague in Oklahoma, we have that she is launching the Seal by Literacy process in Oklahoma, and that's why she decided to participate in today's fall webinar. Thank you so much for sharing that, and congratulations to Oklahoma for launching that process.
Okay, excellent, Anne-Marie. Thank you for sharing the results. So now that you know how the webinar works, it is my pleasure to introduce our Necessful president, Ophelia Wade, to do some of our Necessful updates. Ophelia? And just one moment here, I am looking just to make sure that we have Ophelia on the line.
I think she may be having some technological problems right now, so she's not yet able to have audio.
Okay. All right, so we're going to go ahead and move forward. I'll share a little bit with you, and if Ophelia is able to join in, we'll go ahead and move back into her. So Anne-Marie, if you can monitor that login box to see if there's any assistance you can provide and let me know when she's able to make it, I'll go ahead and continue with what we have while we're waiting for Ophelia. Okay, so as all of you know, we are going to welcome our Necessful members to join together in our nation's capital in just a few short weeks from November 18th to the 22nd with our theme of a 60-year legacy of supporting languages. This is our Jubilee celebration for Necessful, and we are really looking forward to some exciting activities that are going to take place there. If Ophelia is able to get logged in, we'll come back to that and let her share some of those special plans that she has in mind. But you can get a little quick preview there by looking at some of the pictures of some places where we may have some interactions take place. Our Tuesday morning is going to start a little earlier than we normally do for our annual meeting. We actually have a morning session scheduled to take place at the National Geographic Society. And some of the lovely people there are going to provide an overview of the resources they have that would be of use for language educators and language leaders. And they also have an opportunity they want to share with us on the potential to participate with them in the translations of the Explorer magazine. And if any of you are familiar with that, it is a tool that has been used very often in dual immersion classrooms to support the content area of science and some social sciences as well. In the afternoon, we'll be moving back to the convention center with our more traditional pre-conference workshop, and this will include a panel that will take place, and we will be talking about state standards as well as some other regional initiatives that will be on the agenda for that time. So it looks to be a really exciting Tuesday, because at the end of that evening, you are all going to be invited, and we do invite all of you to mark your calendars for our 60th anniversary Jubilee Gala. And that is going to take place Tuesday evening starting at 6 p.m. at the Mexican Cultural Institute. There's a lot of exciting things planned for this, and we've been very fortunate that we've been able to hold the cost to this down with the help of sponsors to just the price of our normal Tuesday networking dinner. So it's a $50 registration fee, but a lot more than just the dinner, with a really great menu that Ophelia has worked with our caterers on, as well as some opportunities to celebrate some of the successes that we've had as an organization over the last 60 years, both ourselves and with our partners. Our Wednesday activities will move on to our business meeting back at the Convention Center, as well as our Supervisor of the Year luncheon. And then in our afternoon part, we will have some unconference sessions, followed in the evening by our traditional President's Reception. On Thursday, because we are at the nation's capital, the opportunities will be a little different than our normal Thursday NACESFL meeting. We will have opportunities to work with ACTFL's Assembly of Delegates and our other organizations to participate in their sessions, but we'll also have the opportunity for those who can't join the Capitol Hill sessions to have some briefings and informational sessions as well. And you'll learn a lot more about that from Ophelia when she's able to get on with us, as well as in the pre-conference business session that we'll have on November 1st. And then, of course, Thursday evening's President's Reception is going to take place at the Newseum Museum, and we will hear more about that from Ophelia. Friday activities abound. There will be a breakfast available for our NADSFL colleagues as well as for our NACESFL members to have that final joint breakfast together. So we do hope that we're going to see all of you there, and that you will be able to join us for that Tuesday morning session as well as our Tuesday afternoon workshop. I also do want to point out that you did receive an email. I hope you received the email, that for those of you who would not be able to come in Monday evening just because of the cost of the hotel room for that extra night, we do have a scholarship opportunity available. So if you are interested in being there Tuesday morning, but it would involve Monday evening travel and an extra hotel night, please do feel free to take advantage of that opportunity to apply for that NACESFL scholarship for that extra hotel night for Monday evening. So we're going to wrap this part up with just another quick poll question for you, and let's find out of our members present, which of you have registered for this 2019 annual meeting in Washington, D.C., and which of you plan to get around to that soon. So if we can go ahead and launch this poll, let's find out from you where you're at, and I'm going to have Anne-Marie read out the results when finished. And it looks like we're at just about 100% complete. So Anne-Marie, I'm going to go ahead and turn this over to you to give the poll results, and also to respond to any lingering questions we might have in the question box before we introduce our presenters for today.
Great, thank you, Lisa. And it looks like almost 40% say that yes, they've been registered for weeks or months for our annual meeting in Washington, D.C. this year. A little over 20% said you registered recently, so that's great. Another 20% or so said that you haven't registered yet, but you will when you get travel approval. And we have some folks who are putting some other reasons in the question box. In fact, I see one person is commenting, Tammy is commenting, that she has multiple hats, as many of us do. She's the world language supervisor for her state and also the social studies supervisor. And apparently those two national meetings basically happen at the same time in two different places. So she's asking about trying to collaborate and integrate the meetings. I will tell you one thing we know is obviously we have our successful annual meeting the 3 days before the ACTFL annual convention starts. And so we are in sync with them for that reason, because of the number of people who attend both Necessful and ACTFL. We are also aware that there are some other national meetings like the social studies meeting, and in fact there's also the La Cosecha conference for dual language education happening in New Mexico right around the same time. Sometimes we overlap or sometimes they're a week apart. That is something to think about, but it is, as far as our timing, is something that we are coordinating with ACTFL, so we'll pass that along. But in general, we are looking forward to a great 2019 annual meeting in Washington, D.C., and it looks like we're getting registered as we go. And so keep that information coming in. If you have any questions about registration, always feel free to ask. All right. Well, our main focus today is Seal of Biliteracy research, and we've called it Past, Present, and Future. You see up here on the screen, we actually have two research teams with us today to share what they're doing with the Seal of Biliteracy and in their work. We have Dr. Kristen Davin and her graduate student Charlotte Hancock from the University of North Carolina, Charlotte. And we also have Dr. Meg Malone and her graduate student Margaret Borosic from Georgetown University at the Assessment and Evaluation Language Resource Center. I believe Dr. Malone also has a colleague or another graduate student with her today to present, but that's who we have with us. And I'm going to go ahead and invite Dr. Davin and her team to begin their presentation.
Wonderful. Thank you so much. Okay. Thank you all for having me here today. I'm an associate professor at the University of North Carolina at Charlotte, and I'll be presenting today with Charlotte Hancock, a doctoral student and graduate assistant here who's been working with me on this research. And we're going to talk a little bit about some of the research we've done in the past, what we're currently working on, and where we hope to go in the future. So there's three research strands under which most of the research that we've done falls. It started back in 2017, looking at variation in the seal of biliteracy policies across the different states. Currently, we've published some research on the benefits and barriers of implementation of the seal of biliteracy. And we're now currently working on some projects and in the planning stages of some future projects on student outcomes related to seal of biliteracy attainment. So I'll start by talking a little bit about a research study that we conducted in Illinois, looking at the benefits and barriers to implementation of the seal of biliteracy. For this research, we conducted interviews with world language and ESL department chairs at 3 different districts in the Chicagoland area. And we also interviewed 13 world language and ESL teachers at those different districts. We surveyed all the world language and ESL teachers at each school, as well as 10th and 12th graders at one high school in each district. And then we wanted to hear from students too. So we conducted focus groups with 12th graders pursuing the seal and 12th graders not pursuing the seal at one high school in each district. We published the results of this finding in Foreign Language Annals in 2018, so you can go there to find more details about, response rates and who participated in the different components of data collection. But the purpose of the article was to answer the questions of what do administrators and teachers report as benefits and barriers to implementing the seal of biliteracy. And so at these 3 districts where we collected data, you'll see that most of them, or District A and B at least, were offering the seal of biliteracy in the languages that they taught in that school. Whereas District C had expanded a little bit more. So in Illinois, in addition to passing an approved language assessment, Schools also have the option of letting students demonstrate their proficiency through a portfolio, which shows their ability to read, write, listen, and speak in the language. And so District C was able to do that portfolio option in Polish because they had a teacher there who was trained on the ACTFL proficiency guidelines and also knew Polish. But at the other schools, you see that it was mostly the languages taught within the school. What we found in that initial research study was that the teachers and administrators were reporting some washback on world language instruction. So one school was in its second year of seal of biliteracy implementation, one was in its third year, and the other one was in its fourth year. And 56% of the teachers in our sample indicated that the seal of biliteracy had changed their instruction, while 69% indicated that it had changed their assessment. So washback is just this idea that as a result of giving the STAMP assessment or the Apple assessment or the AP assessment and looking at those results to see how students did, the teachers then, based on those results, started to modify their instruction to help students perform higher on those assessments. Along those lines, 31% of the teachers indicated that they used the Necessful ACTFL can-do statements more after seal of biliteracy implementation. 34% reported that they used the ACTFL World Readiness Standards more. 38% reported an increase in the use of the ACTFL proficiency guidelines in their instruction and assessment. 41% reported that they spent more of their class time on working on speaking and listening with students. 38% reported that they spent more time working on reading and writing. And then 48% indicated that the assessments they were doing in their classroom, the classroom-based assessments throughout the year, were becoming more proficiency-based, more focused on interpretive, interpersonal, and presentational communication. We also found from one of the schools or one of the districts that was in its fourth year of implementation that they were seeing an increase in the number of students enrolled in AP language courses and therefore taking those AP language tests. So you see here that the number had grown from 151 in 2015 to almost double in 2017 with 279. We found that one of the barriers to implementation that the teachers and administrators reported was related to students not beginning to study a world language early enough. So 56% of teachers indicated that that was a problem. And this was especially true for less commonly taught languages. So for example, one of the teachers was talking about Hebrew and how if students did not start studying Hebrew until their freshman year of high school, it was very hard to get them to the intermediate high proficiency level by their senior year. Another teacher too spoke about how Chinese is one of the most difficult languages and how to learn Chinese you really need to spend some experience living in China. And so these teachers were talking about how it was difficult to have this award and have students take 4 years of their language and then still not achieve the award. So that was one barrier. Another barrier that didn't come up as much in this initial study was the lack of availability of world language tests. And this is something that, one of these school districts was primarily English dominant, meaning most of the students spoke English at home, were from English speaking backgrounds. But at one of the schools in particular that was particularly diverse, District C, where they were trying to do some portfolio options, they reported that a big problem was the lack of availability of world language tests. And so in one of the interviews, one of the department chairs spoke about how they had a core group of Tagalog speakers and they really wanted to do a portfolio, but they didn't have the capacity to do that because they didn't have anyone that could score it. They also talked about how they had Syrian speakers, but they also didn't have the capacity to score those. So that was an early indication of a problem that we've seen a lot more since then, which we'll talk about more. Another research study that came out of those data in Illinois appeared in the Bilingual Research Journal last year. And so others have pointed out how quickly the seal of biliteracy has been adopted across the United States, and how little research there is to date, although that's changing very regularly right now. And at the time that we started this study, there was really little research into what students thought about the seal of biliteracy. So with this study, we sought to examine what students perceived as benefits and barriers to the seal of biliteracy. What we found was that both English dominant students and linguistically diverse students, which we define as students who spoke another language at home or who had family members who spoke another language at home, they both perceived benefits of the seal of biliteracy as future employment opportunities, future career use, college credit, and just this idea of having an additional seal on the transcript. So if I go to the next slide, you'll see that this looks quite similar for the linguistically diverse students. 56% strongly agreed that future career use was a benefit of the seal of biliteracy. 48% strongly agreed that college credit was a benefit, whereas with English dominant students, again, 45%. And so Illinois is one of 4 states currently where students who earn the seal of biliteracy get college credit or can request college credit for that award. And so it was interesting. Recently, I was in a writing group with colleagues, and they asked, well, what about the other 32 states, where there isn't college credit? What's motivating students to pursue the seal of biliteracy in those places? And so other motivators that students talked about were future employment opportunities and future career use. But we really need research in those areas too to find out more about that. One thing that I've seen in Missouri that's been really innovative with the work of Ryan Rumpf is that they've been going to businesses in the area talking about the seal of biliteracy and getting basically letters of endorsement or recognition from those companies on company letterhead of the seal of biliteracy, and those are available on their website. So that's one potential way to do that. In regard to barriers, they were pretty similar in some areas and quite different in others. So the orange bar represents the percent of our English dominant students that indicated this was a barrier, and the blue represents the percentage of linguistically diverse students. And we found that both groups, about 50% or to 64%, indicated that a lack of confidence in their world language skills was a barrier for them pursuing and earning the seal of biliteracy. The second point here is the one, though, that's the most concerning to me. Lack of information about how to earn the seal. This was indicated by 24% of English dominant students, but 43% of linguistically diverse students. So I know from my own background as a world language teacher, as a Spanish teacher, that when I first heard about the seal of biliteracy, I was so excited and so willing to embrace it, wholeheartedly, because it was a motivation for students to take more than 2 years of a world language in high school. And so I think a lot of world language teachers have really embraced this and really talk it up in their classes, but sometimes those linguistically diverse students aren't in the world language classes. That's often the case in the research that we've done. And so this was a huge attention grabber that we need to find better ways to reach linguistically diverse students about the seal of biliteracy. So some major takeaways from this research study was that we have to enhance and advertise the post-secondary opportunities related to the seal of biliteracy. Again, as I said, Missouri is doing something very innovative in that regard that perhaps other states could mimic. It would be wonderful if we can get college credit attached to the seal of biliteracy in more states, because that really can open doors for students, make college more accessible for students who might not have the opportunity to take advanced placement courses and earn college credit in high school. That can be a real game changer. Another point that emerged was the need to flexibly schedule assessments during the school day. So what we found in our research in Illinois was that when schools offered the assessments on Saturdays or after school, a lot of students don't have flexible schedules. They might be taking care of siblings, or they might have jobs or sports. And so one of the districts had just started implementing incorporating the assessment during the school day, where students could basically take what was considered a field trip, miss their other courses, and take this assessment to earn the seal of biliteracy. So that increases access. Streamline and extend the dissemination of information with particular attention to reaching linguistically diverse students. In all of the places where we've done research, we find that administrators and teachers say, oh yes, we talk about the seal all the time, it's everywhere, students know about it, but then when we talk to students, they really know very little bit about it, or they didn't find out about it until their senior year. And so we need to find ways to get this information to them earlier, and with more detail, so they know, so they can prepare in advance. And then providing diverse and extended pathways for students to learn an array of different languages. So starting language learning earlier and finding ways to help students maintain their home languages in schools. Okay. Current projects, Amy Heineke and I have edited a volume on the seal of biliteracy, case studies and considerations for policy implementation. It's currently in press with Information Age Publishing, and should be out within the next year, but we're looking forward to sharing this with everyone. We had really wonderful contributions from folks like Laurie Olson in California. Tanya De Leon included a chapter based on her dissertation work in California. We have an example case study from Massachusetts, as well as school and district case studies in Washington State about what districts opt in and which opt out. A study on LA Unified students and faculty and staff by Alma Castro. Justin Fisk from Illinois contributed a chapter on how they're expanding access to the seal of biliteracy there in his school. Nick Subtirolu at Georgetown contributed a chapter taking a critical lens on the policy. And then Guadalupe Valdez wrapped us up by looking at issues of equity and inclusion and making recommendations on how to continue to shape the policy moving forward. So we're excited about that. And now I'm going to hand it over to Charlotte.
Hi, everyone. So I'm going to talk to you today about the research that we are currently working on investigating in Minnesota. So right now we are investigating the seal of biliteracy in Minnesota by talking to administrators across the state to see how they are increasing equity and access with the seal of biliteracy. And the research questions driving our study are, how do schools in Minnesota put the seal of biliteracy policy into practice? How do students pursuing the seal of biliteracy perceive its impact? And how does the seal of biliteracy impact students after graduation? So for this study, we began collecting data in the fall of 2018 by interviewing admin at Minnesota's Department of Education and 4 districts in Minnesota, 2 urban and 2 suburban districts. And so we went in the spring of 2019 to conduct focus groups with 12th grade students, both who were pursuing and not pursuing the seal. These focus groups took place at 6 schools, 4 urban and 2 suburban. And at the urban schools, around 90% of these students were linguistically diverse, and at the 2 suburban schools, the students were predominantly English dominant. In the spring of 2020, we plan to survey the students who earned the seal of biliteracy in the previous year to see in what ways the seal of biliteracy has impacted them after graduation. And for our preliminary findings, it's important to note that Minnesota is an assessment state in regards to the seal of biliteracy. And while we are still analyzing the data, there are some preliminary findings that we would like to share with you today. We have found many innovations in the state of Minnesota. The Minnesota Department of Education, in conjunction with St. Paul and Minneapolis schools, as well as in collaboration with ACTFL, have created assessments in Czech, Dakota, Lakota, Ojibwe, Hmong, Karen, Oromo, Somali, and Vietnamese. and have worked towards training faculty and staff and community members as scorers of these languages. Additionally, they have tied college credit to the seals. So I'm going to click over for 1 second. Okay, so this finding is something that we have seen with college credit. That is something that we've seen as a primary motivator for students, as well as for administrators, have hoped that this would increase equity and access of diverse learners in university settings. So students that attend universities in the Minnesota state system can request college credit. So there are 3 tiers for the SEAL in Minnesota. The first tier, called the World Language Proficiency Certificate, requires an actual proficiency level of intermediate low, and it is tied with 2 semesters of college credit. The second tier, called the Gold Bilingual or Multilingual Seal, requires an actual proficiency level of intermediate high, and it is tied with 3 semesters of credit per language. And then the third tier, called the Platinum Bilingual or Multilingual Seal, requires an actual proficiency level of advanced low, and it is tied with 4 semesters of credit per language. So I'm going to go back to our preliminary findings. And so in one district, we found that they were able to provide for students taking the assessments during the day, as well as funding the assessments for students. We have also found in our study that students are allowed multiple assessments attempts, which is very innovative as it requires multiple versions of the test. However, this can lead to challenges in finding and training scores. So a few challenges that we have seen in our preliminary findings is having the assessments scored. For example, there is a Somali assessment available through Minnesota's Department of Education, but the district must have someone who can score it. Additionally, we have found challenges in regards to language course offerings beyond the typical languages we see offered at schools, such as Spanish and French. So there has been a challenge in creating maintenance language courses in Karen and Somali, for example. All right, and so now I'm going to talk to you a little bit about the Tamil School. So while we were in Minnesota, we had the privilege of meeting and interviewing the director of a weekend school in Minnesota called the Minnesota Tamil School. And so we talked with him about how he partnered with Minnesota's Department of Education to create an assessment in Tamil to motivate his students to encourage them to continue in their study of the Tamil language through high school. He was also able to have a large fundraiser in the community so that he could collect funds to give scholarships and to students that from his school that were able to get the seal in Tamil. And in return, those students would give a soft promise that they would help maintain the language in the community after graduation. So our study with this will be coming out in the Language Educator in the next edition. Okay, so future research. I am coming on board with Kristen and Amy to update the 2017 article about the seal of biliteracy and variation in policy and outcomes across the states, as there have been many changes since 2017. So we hope to have these findings and to publish that in 2020, and we have already begun working on that. And so at this point, I will turn it back over to Kristen.
Thank you. Another area of research that we're beginning is looking at is scaling up our previous research. So we've done studies that I've talked about today in Illinois and in Minnesota. We've also started looking at the seal of biliteracy in North Carolina. We published an article in TESOL Journal with Angela Davila, who's here today, on the seal of biliteracy in Washington. And so we want to bring some of our research to scale and start focusing on different states. And so we've been applying for different grants over the past few years to try to begin this research study, and we finally have some seed money to start looking at what are the factors that are influencing students' language development. So 3 research questions are going to guide this work. What are the educational, demographic, and linguistic characteristics of students who are achieving the seal of biliteracy in the United States? how do schools, districts, and states implement the seal of biliteracy in practice, and then how do various educational programs and practices influence students' bilingualism and biliteracy. So we're hoping this fall to begin with phase 1 of interviews and artifact collection at the state level to understand the context around the seal of biliteracy. And then phase 2 will be a survey of students earning the seal of biliteracy. So how Necessful can help. Anne Marie said we could put a slide in today to talk about how your help would be useful to us. So here's the plan. Next week, I plan to send you all each an email. Charlotte's been putting together a spreadsheet with updated information from state websites on the requirements of the seal of biliteracy and the characteristics of it. So I'm going to send that information to each of you and ask you to make any corrections or any revisions that you see necessary, as well as to respond to a few questions about recent changes or innovations. So that will be for the update to the 2017 Foreign Language Annals article. And then for the second research study, I'd like to ask you to contact Amy Heineke or myself to let us know if you're interested in participating. We'd love to schedule, I'll be at ACTFL this year, I'd love to schedule a time to sit down with you to start learning about your context and the seal of biliteracy in your state. Or we can schedule a telephone call or virtual meeting to start kicking off that second research study, phase 1 of that research. As I mentioned, we'll be at ACTFL this year, so if you're available on Friday, November 22nd at 2:30, please come hear Charlotte and I talk more about the study from Minnesota. We'll have a lot more data to share with you then. And I want to thank you all for your time today and for listening to our presentation.
All right, thank you so much for sharing that with us. I'm getting some thank yous in the chat box as well. People appreciate this information. They consider it very important to the work we do across our states. We did have one question, and you might be able to answer this, or we might want to talk about it in general in some way. Michelle from the western side of the country said, if students can earn college credits for earning the seal of biliteracy, how does that work with AP and IB tests? Do they get credits for the seal and for the AP or IB test results?
As I understand it, and those from the 4 states, including Illinois and Minnesota, can jump in if they want to, but I think it's a one or the other. I don't think you can double dip and get both credits for AP and also the seal of biliteracy. But anyone else can chime in, please, if I'm incorrect.
Kathleen, I see that you have your hand raised. I'm going to unmute you. Do you have something to share on this? You're unmuted.
Sorry, it was an accident.
Sorry. All right. Stephanie and Nebraska asks, is there a guideline for colleges as to what possible equivalencies exist for the seal of biliteracy and college credit?
That's a great question too. I am not aware of any college guidelines that exist. I know that in Illinois there are certain universities that will give students college credit for the seal of biliteracy from any state, which is really interesting, and I think that's particularly innovative. But in other contexts, like for example with the law in Minnesota, where the Minnesota state system colleges and universities award credit, there's a particular number of credits that they're required to award based on the tier of the seal, but I don't know how those correspond to specific courses or what that looks like. And students do have to request that credit when they get there. It's not just automatically applied.
All right. And Ursula from Minnesota is saying that for Minnesota, that's correct. Students can earn either college credits from the seal of biliteracy or from their AP and IB test results, but not both. And Michelle also would like to ask, have universities had any concerns about giving up their credits to sealed biliteracy earners, such that it lowers enrollments in university language courses?
So I know that, for example, the University of Minnesota is not part of the Minnesota state system of colleges and universities. And from my understanding, there have been conversations with University of Minnesota about that policy. And it is my impression that yes, that they do have that concern, and that might be part of the reason why they're not participating. But again, Ursula, feel free to jump in here. You're more of an expert on this than me, but I do think that that is a concern.
Ursula, I can unmute you to kind of share that perspective. You are unmuted if you want to just speak out.
Okay, sure. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, you're loud and clear.
Okay, awesome. And yes, the state colleges and universities were very supportive of the seals, and we collaborated to determine how to allocate credit. And because different schools do have different credits per course, we decided on semesters as a way of simplifying that process for as schools as they enroll students. And so 2 semesters, regardless of where they are, will equal the same, will have the same value. As for the University of Minnesota, yes, the University of Minnesota does not. They're a land grant university in a different system, and they have opted not to participate in the SEAL program. We have had multiple conversations and have had a variety of reasons, one of which was that because we accept AP and IB, and the University of Minnesota does not accept AP for languages. It would be there would be an inequity for students who come in without a seal and yet have AP scores. Another reason that I was given from someone who is very much involved with the language testing program mentioned that the assessments are not University of Minnesota assessments. And that is especially true for the Hmong and the Somali and the other less commonly spoken languages. And then also there was a question of really how will this be implemented, and a little bit like opening the Pandora box. And the University of Minnesota does have a way of allocating credit for previous language learning, but that's really on a case-by-case basis. And I do know that Hmong students have gotten some credit, although I don't know how much that they actually received. And I just want to add one more thing, and that is some of the private colleges and universities in, at least in the metro area, have started to recognize the seals and give credit to students. And so that's a good sign, because students can then feel as if their language ability is recognized elsewhere, and they can get that credit, and it just opens up their roster of languages, roster of schools that they could consider after high school.
And there are several comments in the question box about how some of the things that Ursula is sharing have also been concerns expressed in other places in the country. So this issue of, college credits versus course enrollment has also been an issue at the University of Washington, according to Michelle. And Maria is wanting to know if there's any data about the enrollment numbers to know if, in fact, enrollment has dropped at the college level or how that's being impacted.
Yeah.
I'm not aware of any enrollment numbers regarding that yet. I think that that's a great place to go. All of the research on this is just so new and emergent that there's so many areas that we need to continue to look at to fully understand how this policy is impacting students, teachers, administrators, schools, districts, and universities. But that's definitely an area that would be a great area for research. What I do know from our focus groups, and again, we'll present more on this at ACTFL, is that for a lot of these students, a lot of the linguistically diverse students we spoke to in Minnesota were planning to attend colleges in the Minnesota state system, and this was the primary motivator that they pursued the seal of biliteracy, because they wanted those college credits and their parents wanted them to get those college credits. So it is a big It is a big motivator. I do think it's a great way to increase students' access to college, but I don't know what impact it's having on enrollment yet.
We do not have any data yet from the Minnesota State Colleges, just to support what Kristen has said, and we have actually started to ask for that, and are doing a presentation in 2 weeks at the Transfer Curriculum Conference, and hoping to get get information, at least from the attending schools, as to how many students have asked for seals, and whether they're whether they're having difficulty granting those credits, and whether or not is a benefit to the students. One caveat in the granting of seals is that students have to request them, and the reason for that is that when students, generally in student programs, language is an elective, and under the state colleges and university system, if students are not on track meeting their required courses by the time they're juniors, and it looks as if they may not graduate within a reasonable period of time, their financial aid could be impacted. And so the requesting of credit at those semesters should be done with an advisor, so that they don't negatively impact students, where you're trying to give them a financial benefit and then find out that by junior year it will have negatively impacted them.
Okay, so it sounds like there's a lot of information to share about this. Please note on the screen that Dr. Davin is going to be at an actual session, so you may want to mark your calendars for that. We are also seeing some other questions and so forth about the seal of biliteracy. Like, we're going to save those till the end of the next presentation that we're about to do on that, as well as share some links and so forth that are coming up in the questions box. So thank you very much, Dr. Davin and Charlotte. And we'll go ahead and move on then to Dr. Malone and her research team.
Okay, good afternoon, everybody. Thank you so much for inviting us. And actually, just listening to Kristen and Charlotte's presentation was my professional development for the month. So I have all these, Margaret and Malik can tell me that I have all these things written down that I want to follow up on. But I'm just going to introduce this a little bit, and I also want to introduce our colleague Malik Stevenson, who's pursuing a doctorate here at Georgetown after teaching K5 ESL. We're so excited to have him with us. Oh, I'm just getting used to this thing. There we go. It is not moving. Oh, there it is. So just to introduce us, we'll just introduce ourselves very, very quickly and then get on to the heart of this. I'm the director of the Assessment and Evaluation Language Resource Center here at Georgetown. Some of you may also know me when I wear my other hat, which is the director of the Center for Assessment, Research, and Development at ACTFL.
And I'm Margaret Bodovchik. I'm a doctoral student here at Georgetown in Applied Linguistics, and I'm also a research associate for the ALRC, working on issues of testing and the seal of biliteracy.
Hello, everyone. My name is Malik Stevenson. I'm also a doctoral student in Applied Linguistics here at Georgetown, and I'm also working with the LRC this semester.
Right. So today for the session, I'll mainly be discussing the findings from a recent article that me and some of my colleagues published in the Modern Language Journal called Recognizing Whose Bilingualism, a Critical Policy Analysis of the Seal of Biliteracy. And then I'll talk about some of the projects that we now have ongoing with the ALRC concerning the seal. So namely a research brief that we just published on our website for administrators and for teachers, as well as a nationwide survey about the seal that we will be launching next month and we'll be asking for your help with. Great. Okay. So first, just a little bit about the motivation for our study, which was essentially that this seal often is framed as benefiting all students, right? So those that are marginalized by language, race, and social class. So we have our ELLs, our heritage language learners, and our students who have found their bilingualism to be, let's say, undervalued historically, as well as the typical classroom foreign language learner. And we know that since educational initiatives inevitably in the US build on an educational system that has been inequitable for generations, even very well-intentioned initiatives like the SEAL, or let's say like dual language programs that are cropping up with increasing speed around the country, often risk then reproducing these inequities. So we wanted to see who mainly benefits from the SEAL, and whether it might be even unwittingly exacerbating some existing inequalities in the US education system. So we did that by carrying out a critical policy analysis by looking at, for one, how the SEAL is talked about in policy and in promotions, and two, what were the material effects of the policy in certain states. So from that, we explored three main topics: promotional and policy discourses, requirements for demonstrating biliteracy, and then implementation across schools and districts. Cool. Okay. So to see how the SEAL is talked about in policy and in promotional documents, we looked at three things. So guidelines for implementing the SEAL, the ones that are officially available on the SEAL Biliteracy website. A video promotion for the SEAL done by Californians Together, who are the main sort of advocates and sponsors of the SEAL initially, and legislation from state congresses and boards of education across the 6 states that you see listed here. And then our main question, research question that we wanted to answer, was, do these documents talk about talk about language education primarily as a way of maintaining students' ties to their culture and combating historical inequities, so what certain scholars have called the equity or heritage discourse, or as a way to get a better job in the global economy, what has been referred to as the global human capital discourse. Okay. So here's an example from a video called The Sale of Biliteracy, Celebrating Students of the 21st Century. And here, Lori Olson, who is a very prominent advocate for the SEAL, she says this: "There's no question that this is now a global era, and for young people, one of the things that has become a real survival skill is the ability to communicate across national borders, across language barriers. They need to have those skills. That's what it means to be growing up in the 21st century, really, to be able to enter into that more global world." So on first glance, this is just an ordinary statement about globalization, not particularly controversial, but one could also easily say that, for instance, multilingualism was a fact of growing up in the 16th century or in New York in the 1960s, right? And here the fact that multilingualism is presented as something completely new gives us some clue as to who the SEAL might be targeted at. So specifically, it locates multilingualism on an international or this kind of global scale in the 21st century, and not as something that's existed in the US for generations. Okay. And then if we look at the legislation that's been enacted about the SEAL in different states, we'll see some of the same exact things. So here I'll look at an example from California, mainly because it was the first state to implement the SEAL, so its program is much more developed than the others. And in that, California was also a model for many of the other state policies. So California enacted their SEAL in 2011 using Assembly Bill 815, and that bill uses a lot of the same discourses that we saw in the video. Right, so here's an excerpt from the California legislation, and we see that it mentions primarily things like contributing to a pupil's cognitive development and national economy and security, expanding trade with other countries, and the demand for employees to be fluent in more than one language, which is increasing in both California and throughout the world. So we see that this orientation towards global and international communication is very clear, right, with the mention of trade with other countries, and then the increasing demand for multilingualism then suggests that this is something that will be relevant in the future. So based on documents like these, we claim that the way that multilingualism is represented in these documents is a bit concerning, because situating multilingualism in the present and future, or on this global and international scale primarily, that can ignore the presence and struggles of immigrant groups and linguistic minorities throughout U.S. history. So instead of centering this narrative that we can imagine that there has always been multilingualism in the U.S., but it's been ignored, and now it needs to be brought to the fore and recognized. Instead, it says that multilingualism is a new phenomenon. And we suspect that this kind of discourse would sound pretty alien to people who come from generations of multilinguals. And instead, it seems to really appeal to English monolinguals. So then this led us to ask questions like, if this policy is framed in this manner in policy and promotional documents, what might be some of the on-the-ground effects? Okay. So then we also examined the requirements that SEAL applicants have to fulfill to demonstrate their biliteracy. And ultimately, the takeaway was that we found that policies set up fairly easier standards and fewer obstacles for English native speakers that are studying a world language. So, for instance, in some states, students classified as English learners are asked to provide more sources of evidence of their English language abilities than other potential SEAL recipients. We also see that standardized proficiency tests are typically designed for foreign language learners in a fairly limited number of languages. That there might be variation on the state level, but I'll get to that in a second. And that the level of proficiency in English required by most states' policies is generally higher than that for the other language. So I'll go through examples of each of these one by one so you get a better sense. So first, we found that many states have created policies with more requirements for English learners than for other students. And here, again, are the requirements from California. I'll be focusing on California throughout. So the first three requirements that you see here are necessary for all students. So whether you're an English learner or whether you are a mainstream world language learner. You need to complete 3 ELA courses with a 2.0 GPA. You need to pass the California English Language and Literacy exam that's required for all 11th graders. And then you need to demonstrate proficiency in a language other than English. So the number 4 that we see here, the CELDT, the California English Language Development Test, that is only necessary for English language learners. So if you're an English learner, you have to pass this additional test of English, and that's on top of passing both your English language arts courses and passing the English language arts assessment for all 11th graders, the CASPP. So we argue that this creates additional barriers for English learners and suggests that policymakers may have been more concerned for holding English learners accountable for their English acquisition than for holding students accountable for learning a language other than English. And that's then also further reinforced by the fact that to satisfy the third requirement that we see here, demonstrating proficiency in a language other than English, students in California can either pass a standardized test or they can complete a series of 4 courses with a B average. So you have that choice of which one you do. Whereas for English, students have to pass complete English courses in addition to a standardized test, and then on top of that, pass the CELDT if they're ELLs. So as I said, that suggests that policymakers have set up much higher expectations for development in English than they have for other languages. Okay. Then the second issue is the reliance on available standardized tests. So the table on the left here that shows 3 families of standardized tests that are widely available in the US, and they have been reported as very commonly used to satisfy requirements for the seal of biliteracy. And of course, that's not a comprehensive list of the tests that can be used for the seal, but they are among the most widely available. So the tests are the APPLE by ACTBO, AP test by the College Board, and the STAMP created by Avant Assessment. So those are the only languages that the test is currently offered in. And then if you compare that to Table 2 on the right, that shows the 10 most commonly spoken home languages of ELLs in the US, and that's from the census in 2016, or the community survey. So as we see, there's no test available from any of these major companies for these major languages like Vietnamese, Hmong, Somali, Haitian Creole, or Tagalog. So many of these students and other learners of less commonly taught languages are often left without an easily accessible test to demonstrate their biliteracy unless their state may have created one through the Department of Education. So they have to jump through these additional hoops. And furthermore, even the tests that do exist are often created for foreign language learners of those languages, so they may not be as valid or reliable for heritage language learners, for instance. Okay, and finally, there's the issue of tests used to assess English being typically more linguistically demanding than test assessing world languages. So here for comparison, I've put up the AP Spanish test versus the test that you would have to take if you're an 11th grader in California to demonstrate English proficiency. So the AP Spanish test, according to their website, is intended to be taken after 4 to 6 years of language study, compared to the general 11th grade language arts or literacy test that's written to be cumulative as well as challenging for English native speakers. Right, so once again, that kind of suggests unbalanced expectations for linguistic development in English versus other languages. Okay, so we believe then that students who are already linguistically privileged, especially native English speakers, have an easier route to earning the seal than their peers. And then that also raises questions about what value that credential can have on the labor market if students can earn it without demonstrating high levels of proficiency in a language other than English. And we've seen, like with the case of Minnesota, they've created separate tiers, which is something that this study also recommends. Okay. And then, so our final area, the third area, has to do with implementation across different schools and districts. So state policies make the seal optional, meaning that schools and districts don't have to participate. And since then, much of the burden of administering and financing the seal is placed on schools, we're concerned that it would be more readily available in richer districts and for more privileged students. Okay. So in order to study that, we obtained data about schools in California in the year 2015 to 2016 and compared schools that participated in the seal and schools that did not. And then we considered things like the school's total enrollment, the percentage of students who qualify for free meals, the racial makeup of the school, and the percentage of English language learners. And then we used logistic regression modeling to model the probability that a school would participate or not in the seal program. So what kind of factors affected whether a school is more likely to implement the seal or whether it wasn't. So I'll go through some of the terms in the model in order of their strength as predictors of school participation in the seal program. And here you'll want to pay attention to the z-score, since that indicates the strength of the effect that a predictor had on the model. So the strongest predictor that we saw was school enrollment. So schools that have more students overall tend to be more likely to implement the seal. And that was kind of expected, since they tend to have more resources overall to absorb some of the fixed costs associated with administering the program. And then the next strongest predictor was the percentage of students classified as fluent English proficient. So those are students that come from homes where a language other than English is used, but they're officially not classified as English learners because usually they've satisfied the state English proficiency requirements. So that's a little bit of good news, since it suggests that schools consider the number of students they have who speak a language other than English at home when they make their decision to participate or not. So it appears that having a student body made up of many fluent English proficient students. Oh.
Hey, could you fix the screen? Oh wait, maybe that's us.
Sorry, just one moment. It bumped the screen off there, somebody's mouse. I'm going to go ahead and refix it.
Anyway, keep talking, Margaret.
Yeah, so, okay, so after fluent English proficient students, the next strongest predictor was the percentage of students who qualify for free meals. And that we actually saw a negative correlation. So you talk. I'll try to do it. Yeah. So that was actually a negative correlation. So when everything else was held constant, schools that had a greater percentage of students who qualify for free meals were less likely to implement the seal. So that means that students who attend schools in higher poverty areas may be less likely to have access to the seal. So that's a little concerning. And then the final set of terms that you see are about the percentage of various racial groups who attend the school. And they kind of show conflicting trends for different groups of students. Go through all of them. So on the one hand, when everything else is held constant, the percentage of white students in the school, when that rises, so does the probability that the school will implement the seal. And that is, the reverse is true for Black and Asian students, right? So when schools enroll higher percentages of Black and Asian students, they're also less likely to offer the seal. So that was concerning because it seemed like granting individual schools a choice in whether to implement the seal or not may have disincentivized the participation of schools that were attended by a higher percentage of students of color and students from low-income families. So then our takeaway from that was that since the seal has been set up, as an optional enrichment opportunity, it seems to be made more readily available at schools with more students who are privileged along these lines of race and social class, which is something that we've seen across other educational initiatives as well. So then given those findings, we came up with 4 recommendations. Okay, so number 1, in promotional and policy documents, emphasizing the social justice goals of marginalized groups, so English language learners, heritage language learners, and students of color, is particularly important since the wording of the policy and the way that it's promoted can very much influence implementation by guiding the focus of who it's meant to benefit and who administrators and teachers think it's meant to benefit. Sorry, some trouble here. Oh, I see. Okay. Okay. 2, equalizing the requirements for demonstrating proficiency in English and the world languages. Then 3, administering the seal at the state level to ensure that all students have equal access to the seal. So essentially not making funding for implementation and testing contingent on the resources of individual schools. And then finally, improving data and accountability on the state level by reporting things like languages in which the students earn the seal, methods used to demonstrate proficiency, free and reduced lunch status, race, gender, and ELL status. So that will then allow us to understand which groups are benefiting from the program and which need more attention. And that definitely helps if that data is consistent across different states, since that's been kind of an issue in getting access to that sort of data. Okay, so that was that for the study, and now I'll turn to the projects at the ALRC that build on some of this work, and then we can take questions afterwards. So the 2 projects that I'll emphasize are the SEAL Biliteracy Research Brief and the National Survey. So we've been working on a document that captures most of the important information about the seal and compiles all the research that's been done to date on the seal and presents it then in a digestible format. So we've included things like key terms, key findings. Oh, sorry, is that popping up for you guys? Yeah, key terms, key findings, and recommendations for administrators, teachers, and world language coordinators. So we really hope that kind of will make research more accessible to various audiences and provide some tips on implementation that are, again, easily accessible.
And we also have a survey you can take if you have any feedback on our research brief.
Yes, we do. And you can find both of those things now on our ALRC website under resources. So if you just search ALRC Georgetown, you'll be able to have access to the brief.
We seem to be having some technical difficulties. I'm not getting any audio anymore. Please raise your hand if you can hear our speakers. Okay. It appears we are having some technical difficulties. I'm seeing notes that there are several people who cannot hear our speakers, and it looks like on the control panel that audio has been lost with them. Let's take a moment and see if we can get them to reconnect. I'll go ahead and read some of our comments while they're working on reconnecting. Ursula wanted to share that in relation to some of the issues we were talking about related to different requirements for different groups of students, that in Minnesota all students have the same requirements. Initially, English learners were asked to demonstrate passing scores on the Access for English Learners test, but prior to actual implementation of the statute for the seal of biliteracy, that requirement was removed. Also, Ursula added that Minnesota has assessments developed with ACTFL for various languages, including Somali, Karen, Hmong, Tamil, Oromo, Vietnamese, and also one that they're working on in Turkish for the spring of 2020. There are several people asking questions about California's requirements, like does California also allow other assessments? They mentioned WorldSpeak and some of the others that were not necessarily mentioned. And that's something that you can check into on the Seal of Biliteracy website. Some of our states are listing that, and even on our Necessful State Reports, we have information about that and links to where you can get that information for different states. Also, we have some people asking about when this information will be available. This is a good time to remind everyone that we post the recording and the slides from this broadcast approximately 1 week following the live broadcast. So by next Friday, October 4th, we hope to have all this information available. And then you'll be able to access it there. We are trying to fix our technology problems right now with our speakers, and we'll do that as soon as we can. We also have a question about, will the test Minnesota and ACTFL developed for less commonly taught languages or language minority groups be available to other states? And that's something that I think I can probably just unmute Ursula on to let her address.
Okay, to answer that question, the answer is yes, but not for next spring. We're working with the ACTFL, and Meg Malone can probably speak better to this, to upload the Somali and the Hmong assessments to to the Apple platform. And because the numbers have, while growing, have not been large enough to do any real statistical analysis, we need to be checked to see how valid the assessments are in practice. I pulled some numbers, which I just got this the last couple of days. One of our districts with a large English learner population issued 45 Somali certificates, 20 gold seals, and 6 platinum seals for this past school year. And so the numbers are growing. It's just become totally unmanageable to do this work with paper and pencil. So in any case, we're hoping that once we've passed the validity and the assessments have been edited appropriately, that they will be available nationally.
Great. And also, I'm seeing some questions about the English language arts requirements for the Seals of Biliteracy. Some states have those, some do not. Again, that's something you can check on the sealofbiliteracy.org website or through our Necessful State reports about the different things going on with the requirements for the Seal of Biliteracy in each state.
Okay, Anne Marie, I think we might have Meg coming back online. Meg, can you hear us now? I saw her icon come on and then go back over. Okay, we're going to give her another minute to try to fix this. Anne Marie, if there's anything else in the question box while we're waiting.
Sure. Ryan in Ohio says to ask the current speakers when they return, in reference to the third recommendation regarding administration of the seal at the state level, is there any way to reword this recommendation in the future to specifically mention providing state funding to back the state's administration of their seal program? Many states, including Ohio, according to Ryan, administer their programs, but they are legislatively unfunded mandates with no money to ensure equity.
Hi, everybody. When did you stop being able to hear us?
Hi, Meg. We're taking one question right now. You're going to have to move back 2 slides, and then we're going to put you right back on.
Okay.
So this is a question from Meg and her crew. This is from Ryan in Ohio. He has a question about your third recommendation on that slide you're moving back to.
Mm-hmm. Oh. Is there a recommendation about implementing it at the level of the state?
Right. It's about looking at that. Yes. Is there any way to reword this recommendation in the future to specifically mention providing state funding to back the state's administration of their Seal of Biliteracy programs? He says that many states administer their programs, but they are legislatively unfunded mandates with no money to ensure equity.
Right. Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's exactly the central component of that recommendation. Administering it at the state level absolutely would entail funding for it at the state level in terms of funding committee members, Seal of Biliteracy committee members, which are typically world language and ELL coordinators, in order to be able to do some of that work in getting different tests together, both for the students in mainstream foreign language classes as well as learners of less commonly taught languages. It would require funding for, if not test development, and test administration. Absolutely, that's absolutely one of the main sticking points here.
And on one of your slides, you had indicated that you had a Seal of Biliteracy research brief.
Yes.
Will you share the address where that can be accessed, or are you planning on adding that as a handout that we can share with folks after this broadcast and as part of the recording?
We can absolutely do that. We can share the shorter PDF version. You can also access it if you Google AELRC Georgetown and look under resources. It will be right there.
I will go ahead and do that and put that in our chat box so that everyone can access it today if they would like.
Great. Oh. Mm-hmm. What did we do? Somebody zoomed it. Okay.
Okay, Meg, if you want to go ahead and pick up to finish where you need to. We're sorry about that interruption and the sound loss, but glad to have you back.
So I don't know when you lost us because we didn't know we were lost. So what slide did you not see?
So right at the end of the slide that you're on, everything after this, we didn't hear you say.
Okay, well, I'm just going to do that quickly because I know everybody has places to go, people to see. We're currently doing a national, and I can't forward the slide, sorry, it's just not forwarding. I'm going to let go of it and let somebody else do it. We're currently finalizing a national survey on the seal of biliteracy, and we're targeting world language and ESL coordinators, teachers, guidance counselors, district and state administrators, and we have developed a list to send it to, but we're going to be looking at resources for implementation, what promotional strategies you have, what kind of washback to the classroom, and any suggestions for improvement. We're trying to understand the trends both by state and across the US, and the purpose of this is there's been some awesome case study research done, and we think now it's time to look really nationally. And we really want to pinpoint the barriers to earning the seal and to make recommendations for policymakers. And I didn't tell Margaret this, but we'll do it again in 2 years to see if anything has changed. Margaret should be gone by then, but Malik, you'll be up. And how you can help us is by, it'll be launching in October, which apparently starts next week. And we're going to ask for your help in terms of not just getting this survey out, but more globally, working toward equity and consistent reporting at the state level, which I know from my 30 years of experience in this, that getting reporting on world languages in general is tough. So anything we can do to get consistent reporting about the seal at the state level will really help. Another way that you can help is by sharing the survey with colleges and relevant colleagues, not colleges, and relevant listservs. And then finally, by pointing educators to our research brief. And as I mentioned, I don't think you heard this, none of you will be surprised to know that there is a survey to evaluate our research brief so you can provide feedback to us on it. And the purpose of the research brief is really for people who maybe don't know much about the seal of biliteracy. So the purpose is to be very approachable and friendly. Another project that we're working on that my colleague who's working on it with me isn't here yet, we're looking at the implications for implementation at higher ed, doing some case studies at state university levels. So thank you. And sorry about the, I don't know what happened. We were online the whole time, according to Georgetown.
Well,
Very
Meg, we
good.
really appreciate you being here with us and taking the time. And sometimes these technology glitches happen. It happens to all of us. But again, thank you for sharing. And now Anne Marie is going to take over and do a wrap up for us.
Well, all I have to do for this part of the wrap up is to share with you that we want to thank all of you, the presenters as well as our participants today, for joining us on this important topic. There were several other questions and comments in the questions box, and those will be shared as part of the materials from this broadcast, which, like I said, will be posted within about a week. We do have some remarks and reminders from Ophelia Wade. She also is having technical problems, our president of NSSFL, but she's asked that I share the following statement with you. She's very sad she could not fully participate, but it was wonderful to listen to the presentations and great questions and member contributions to the discussions. She wanted to issue a special thanks to Kristen, Charlotte, Meg, Margaret, and Malik. Also, she wanted to send along some reminders. Of course, we have coming up our NSSFL pre-conference webinar. That'll be on Friday, November 1st, 2019. Some of you have probably already seen the registration link and registered for that broadcast, but we will be sending it out so that you can register. It starts at our usual time of 2 o'clock Eastern, and the resulting times across our different time zones so that everyone can access it without having to get up too early in the morning. Also, Ophelia wanted to remind everyone to please register for the NSSFL annual meeting this coming week, even if your organization is not able to process your payment at this time. Having accurate numbers will really facilitate our next steps in finalizing our planning, and she'll be sending a Google survey in October with information that the National Geographic Society is requesting from us as part of our partnership in the translation project. She is hoping for record-breaking participation at the annual meeting this year, and she looks forward to personally welcoming you in DC. That's all we have for today. And as we noted, all materials, including the presentation slides, in case you want to use them in professional development, will be made available in the NCESFL members only section on the NCESFL website, ncesfl.org. We do thank you for joining us today, and we're going to take one last look in the question box to see what's there. We do have one person saying they won't be able to attend the NCESFL annual meeting because of a conflict. Can they still sign up for the pre-conference webinar? And the answer is absolutely yes. Anyone is welcome at our NCESFL webinar, any NCESFL member, and you can sign up and attend that even if you can't be with us in DC. I'm also seeing some additional comments. And again, like I said, all the comments and questions will be shared with our materials from this broadcast. So I want to thank everyone for their work on this. We know there's been a lot of work and energy around the seal of biliteracy in different states and in sharing what's happening in different states to encourage others and to make everyone aware of what a great opportunity this is for our students. We also have some questions about attending the NCESFL meeting, even if people are not available for the actual conference, and it's your decision to attend whichever meetings you want, of course. So certainly you can come to the NCESFL meeting for those 3 days before the actual convention. And even if you can't stay for the actual convention, you could still attend the NCESFL meetings. That's all I see in the questions box right now, Lisa. Anything else you want to add?
Okay, we want to thank everyone for joining us. And as a reminder, this is our 60th anniversary Jubilee. Don't forget, we do have that special Tuesday morning session and our Tuesday evening gala that we hope we will see you all at, and watch for more information about that from Ophelia in her President's Messages, as well as to be given out at our annual meeting webinar to take place on November 1st. So thank you all again. If there's no further questions for the group, I am going to go ahead and stop the recording, but we will be on for a few minutes for any continued items that may come in. Thank you very much, and I hope you enjoy the rest of your weekend.